When I started, it was all about them asking me, why would we need to hire you? What is it that you bring to the table?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I stepped down from the corporate ladder less than 2 years ago. Those assessment centers that I ran for those young people, it was a complete reversal. It's like, why would I want to come and join you? And I'm thinking, holy moly, that used to be completely the other way around when I was in charge, right? And so that's how the shift and the different demands in generations will ultimately force, the people function to either play ball and go with that, or start to risk losing some talent, or worse, not being able to attract the right talent into the organization, which I know and you know that is going to be very costly.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in today's show with Navid. What we want you to do is get in line and subscribe and let us know that you're in. So comment that you're in and we'll put you in the drawing to receive a copy of Navid's book, physically or as audiobook. Thanks so much for watching today. Good morning from Wisconsin. Good evening from Dubai. How are you doing today, Navid?
I am doing very well, Brian. I am super stoked to be part of this show and look very much forward to the conversation.
Well, we're really excited too. I always love to have folks that aren't necessarily within arm's reach of where we are here. Sometimes that can be tricky coordinating the time, but I have no problem getting up early. I have 4 children, and my 5-year-old's usually up watching Bluey before the sun comes up. So it was pretty easy to get the house going this morning.
Okay.
So let's just get right into it. I love to learn about folks when we first meet. So if you could share a little bit about yourself, what you're doing now, but then I want to talk about how you got to be doing what you're doing now.
Sure. So I like to think of myself as an executive coach, a best-selling author, a father, and a husband. That's my long list of job titles. But before doing what I do now, I used to work in large corporations. So I spent 26 years working for some of the world's most admired companies at country, regional, and global level. And I have been lucky enough that my work has taken me to be living and working in 5 different countries. So as a matter of fact, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where I'm based right now, this is the second time I've been based in this region. And I believe had I not had the chance to live here before and get to understand the region and the dynamics, I would probably not have made the choice to, settle myself and our family here.
Wow. So where were you born? Where were you raised, Navid?
I was born in Iran and I grew up in Germany.
Okay. How did you end up in Germany from Iran?
Oh, that's a long story, but at the time there was the war going on between Iran and Iraq.
Okay.
And we were 6 years into what ultimately turned up to be an 8-year-old kind of conflict. And at the time I was 13, my parents just didn't know how long this is going to last. So their immediate hunch was, to send me to spend time outside the country. And the only other country we had family living at the time was Germany. So that's how I ended up in Germany without speaking a single word of German.
Do you speak German now?
I do. This is where I spend most of my time and life. And I learned the country to a hardship, my own hardship, but I came to love it for what it is today.
So what was the besides language, what was the biggest culture shock moving to Germany from Iran?
Well, I think, if you're familiar with the cultural framework of Hofstede, there are different dimensions that he, tries to apply to different cultures and societies. And by doing that, he tries to show the differences and the similarities. And I think one of the things that I didn't quite appreciate at the time was this, society being a fabric and the family and friends and everything being in one bucket back home in Iran. And in Germany, not quite as extreme as America, but probably similar and closer to that. It was all about individualism and what you can do for yourself and you have your own destiny in your hands. And so it was really a bit of a culture shock, I guess, to come to terms with the new reality on the ground. and trying to adjust with that and understand and work with it.
Yeah, so the definitely big Western influence I can hear there. And it's interesting. I'm not originally from this state in the U.S., in Wisconsin. I was born in Texas, different state, different type of culture there, but heavy German influence upon folks kind of born and raised over the last couple hundred years in Wisconsin. My wife, her family, all German descent. And, it's funny when I when I was dating my wife and got married and stuff, being around her grandmother who still spoke some German and some Polish and some of these other languages over there, is just a lot of fun kind of learning about some of the quirks and features of that culture.
Yes, talking about that, it wouldn't surprise you, Brian, that for my German friends and colleagues and acquaintances, I'm not a German. And for my Iranian heritage friends and family, I'm not Iranian, right? And that's the reality as well. You become somehow a product of all these wonderful places that you have been able to live and work from. And you can't be, identified with just one entity anymore. You become what I like to think of myself to be a global citizen.
Yeah, absolutely. And how fortunate and blessed you are to have gone through some of those things. Probably not always easy, probably a lot of struggle and some stress and some strife, but you're doing okay, it sounds like.
Oh, I consider myself to be that lucky kid. Yeah.
So growing up in Germany, after the age of 13 and such, and so you're going to your primary and your secondary school and college. Did you go to university in Germany as well?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And you studied, what did you study in college right away?
Yeah, I studied international management because I really didn't think of myself to be working in the people function ever. Mm-hmm. And it was a lucky coincidence that, sparked my curiosity and interest in the HR space. And I then entered into my first role with the world famous 3 Stripes and never looked back since then.
So out of college, straight into HR.
Yes.
And so that's into the corporate world, large kind of enterprise corporate environment.
Adidas, or Adidas, as we say.
Yeah. So you went right into, you're talking 3 Stripes, you're talking about Adidas. So when you entered, you're in HR, were you kind of entry level HR, middle management, or what was it like navigating right away?
So the first thing is when I finished my, Abitur, as we call it in Germany, which is your university entrance exam, I worked for about 6 years before deciding to study. So I did something that was very unlikely of me because my mom had a PhD, my dad had a master's degree. Everyone in my family, in my immediate family, was an academic. Mm-hmm. And so I was just done with learning and schooling and teachers and all that. So I felt that I wanted to do something that is more real and something that is more immediately serving the needs that I had. And so I worked in sales for 6 years, and I came to really love that function.
All right, now you're talking my language now.
It's a super transparent function. If anyone has any doubts, just go and look up the sales board and the sales league, and you know what you're made of. It's a hard thing for most people. I just loved it. I felt, and I did 3 years B2C sales and 3 years B2B sales. So I tried both versions of the same, and I just loved it. And so the only reason I went to study was to return to sales and progress my career with the university, with a master's degree in my pocket. And as I said, it was a lucky coincidence that as part of my student work, I was working for a media company called Bertelsmann Group, at the time the largest media group in Europe. And I was a project leader for an online gaming business.
Okay.
This is at the time where you had to, pay a fortune and more to go online and connect with, all these portals. And I was
charged by the minute to connect, exactly, right? Yeah.
The modem times, right? I'm dating myself now. And so I was a project leader for this game channel.de was the portal, and they had 100 games on it. And the idea was that whoever comes on this portal will be entertained in such an amazing way that they never want to hang up. And so this idea to hook them into the portal and just excite them was what I was tasked with. And so I then had this, out of the world experience with the HR business partner at the time. And it was so fundamentally different than the experience that I have had prior to that with the people function. I found them to be too far removed from the reality of the business. I found them to be not helpful at all. And I really didn't understand what they do, because I knew that whenever I needed them, they surely couldn't help me.
Right.
And so that was not a great starting point for any function, but that was my kind of love-hate relationship with HR. And this
I think that's the experience a lot of people get or have gotten, right?
Unfortunately, but I have hope that in my 20 years in HR, I have tried to be a better example of that, and someone who is adding value and someone who is kind of close to the business. But anyway, I met this lady through my project. So I had a few vacancies on my project team, and she reached out to me proactively. I didn't have to ring her up to say, hey, I got a few vacancies. Can you help me with those? And said, hey, I have seen that you have been appointed to this project. I know that you have 2 or 3 vacancies. If you have 10 minutes, I come, by your desk by the end of play today. And she did. Lo and behold, she showed up and said, what do you have in mind? Like, what will be great profiles for those vacancies that you have? So we had a chat about those. And then at the end of it, she said, and by the way, do you have any prior interviewing experience? And I said, yes, but only as a candidate, right? I'd never been a line manager before. I'd always interviewed for jobs, but I'd never interviewed for a vacancy. And she said, I know you're busy. I understand you're studying full time, and this is kind of a part-time job for you. How about I, organize like a 2-hour training for you, the do's and don'ts of recruiting and interviewing. And I thought, holy moly, where have you been? Like, what a different experience. And of course, I did that short training. I learned a few things about how to interview and what to look for, how to check against competencies. But above and beyond that, I really came to realize that there are all sorts of different HR people in the world. And this type that I had just experienced would be my aspiration to be one day. And that's what led me to shift away gears and go from sales to HR. And of course, I don't have to tell you, having German, family members, that nobody wanted to hire me. Application that I, made, and, at the time it was starting to go online, I sometimes got very polite rejection letters or emails to say, oh, so sorry to say, but, we have decided for someone else. Or someone was kind enough to ring me up and say, I'm so sorry, but I think you have applied for the wrong position. Right? I see you have a sales background. We have amazing sales opportunities for you. And I had to say to them, I am not looking to continue in sales. I want to shift my gears and career into HR. Yeah. And all it took, and I hope I'm allowed to make a plug here for her, was one person, one woman who said, I'm going to take a bit of a risk with you. You don't have my, what everyone believes to be a stereotypical HR profile. Yeah. Yep. But you will certainly be the first person that I hire as an assistant HR manager into my team, into Adidas, that has sold our products before. And that was how she made it, a meaningful hire, by adding someone that wasn't quite as deep on the HR knowledge side of things, but someone who understood everything about the product. And of course, I also don't have to tell you, Brian, that I didn't get any cookie points because of the 6 years that I spent in the sales function. Right. I had to perform from day one like anyone else who had spent 5 or 6 years in the HR function. So I really had to earn my right to be in HR.
So I'm fascinated by this. You go from sales, and you were doing well in sales, right? You mentioned you'd done some. So when you were selling B2C, what were you doing, and who were the customers that you were selling to?
That was a retail store at the time.
Retail. Okay.
boutique business. Think of it like Foot Locker. It just wasn't Foot Locker. So it was something similar where you sell sneakers or trainers, fashion wear, anything that is to do with sports and fashion.
Okay, so we won't go too far in the weeds of selling at the retail level, but I've never. Well, I take that back. When I was in college, I worked at a video game store, so I did work in retail. What's a quick principle key to being successful as a retail salesperson? Because I think a lot of people walk into a store and they have that mindset of, I don't want to be talked to. I just want to look around. Hey, if you ask me a question, I'm just looking, and then I'm gonna do my thing, and I'm either gonna buy something or I'm gonna leave. Like, in nowadays, I can't remember the last time I've been into a retail store where someone even engaged me at all.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It's, you go in and I'm looking around, and it's funny. I'm in my 40s now. I was at the mall with my wife this last weekend, and I walked into a Finish Line and a Foot Locker because I like to look at shoes. I like sneakers, and no one even, I take that back. One lady, she said, "Hi, welcome to the store. Let me know if you need anything." That was it. But otherwise, it was almost like I was being actively avoided as a customer.
Yes.
So in your experience in retail, how do you go about doing that successfully?
Yes. So I have to go back all the way to the first person that I had in that retail outlet, who was the store manager. And again, an amazing guy. His name is Michael Klein. And he was like a real veteran in the retail business. And he said to me one thing that I will never forget. He said, two things I want to share with you that will make you one of the best salespeople in this universe. One is know your customer. And it sounds simplistic. It sounds a little bit cliche, but know your customer. And the second thing I want to share with you as a piece of advice is you don't have to be the best in anything. You have to be best at becoming better. And those two pieces of advice I took on. And I can tell you, I really went from being a nobody in that retail universe. We had 14 branches all across Germany, and everyone was selling the exact same set of products, right?
Yeah.
And within a matter of, let's say, 4 to 5 months, I was in the leaderboard in the top 10 sales individuals in the country. And that was all done by following blindly these two pieces of advice. Know your customer, and you don't have to be the best in anything. You have to be the best in becoming better. And that's how I, worked my way up. I was the very best in the country in accessory sales, which is socks and caps and hats and items that most people don't even think of when walking into a store like that, because they're looking for the sneakers or the pair of pants or something like that.
Yeah. I'm when it comes to things I like, it's pretty easy to sell me on them. I'm looking to buy those things in the first place, but I'm the first person that'll talk myself out of buying it, because I'm like, no, I don't need that. I don't need to spend money on that. I need to save some money, whatever, right? But I can tell you, if I was to walk into a store that had the brand that I liked, and someone engaged me and tried to get to know me and quickly found out the kind of things I'd like and showed me a hat. I like hats. I like shoes. I do like accessories. I like comfortable socks. All those things you just talked about to me. If someone was to come up to me and engage me and show interest and try to learn about what I was truly looking for, they'd probably make some sales.
Yes. And Brian, allow me also by saying that, and I will get a lot of comments on this, I'm sure. The most embarrassing moment in my entire life was when our HR colleagues came to our store to deliver a sales training. My goodness, I was ashamed for them, because they obviously had not sold a thing in their life.
Yeah.
And yet they pretended to know what great sales looks like and what process you should follow. And they just, looked it up somewhere and just trying to pretend to know a thing about sales. Yeah.
I think that's an important point. I when we're talking about, going from successful sales into the HR world, I think whether it's sales or service or operations, anything that's kind of outside of that HR silo in companies, there's this, if you're talking to HR, you're probably in trouble, right? And if HR is trying to teach you how to do something, they don't know what they're talking about because they're not doing it anyway, because they don't have the fruit on the tree, like you just mentioned. So on the HR side of things, how do you bridge that gap Do you spend time like actual doing and learning and from the HR side of things, or is it bringing people that have success on the other side in those organizations into HR, teaching them the science of HR and then applying it, or how do you humanize HR?
So first off, if you were to follow the simple 2 rules that my sales mentor shared with me, right? Know your customer. I can cite the example of my last employer. So my last company that I worked for is called Vodafone. And Vodafone is one of the largest international telecommunication companies in the world. They used to have a 40% share in Verizon in the US. So they were the majority shareholder of Verizon at the time. Anyway, they sold that shareholding back to Verizon. But, we had this program designed called The Insider. And the idea behind the Insider was that no matter what function you work in, you could be in finance, you could be in HR, you could be in marketing, you could be anywhere in the organization, you can tap into the real world of what delivers value to our business. Such as I exploited that program to the maximum because I was new to the telecommunication industry. This is another little secret about my career, is that I never repeated the same industry. I never went back to any of the industries that I gained experience in. So I went from retail to events to sporting goods to commercial finance with GE at the time, the most valuable company in the world. They're in a very different place right now. Then I went to fast-moving consumer goods. Then I moved to pharmaceuticals, and then I moved to telecommunications. So that means that I was the newbie all the time.
Every time.
I did not have any sector knowledge or any industry experience when entering those. And that being said, what I made my thing is, what have I seen that worked in a particular sector or two that I may, with some adaptation and adjustment, apply to this one industry that I'm in right now. Now, my way of learning about the industry was know your customer. So what did I do? I went and spent, I did like one a quarter. So one experience a quarter. Sometimes I did 2 a quarter. So I did and go and spend time in one of our retail outlets. When you walk into a Verizon store, they got the devices, they got the plans, they got the TV products, they got all these various products and services they sell. They got insurance and so on. So I was actually the greeter. They thought this is the position where this guy can, create the least damage. So they put me as the greeter, like, hey, welcome to Vodafone. Let me know if you need anything and I'll be sure to get you some help. I went and worked in our call center operation, which was really enlightening. I mean, sitting and listening. I wasn't obviously talking to customers, but just listening into calls that came in either through angry customers or developing an appreciation for the complexity of our business on the software side was really, really, eye-opening and mind-blowing. I went and, we were the largest TV company in Germany. We had 22 million paying TV clients at the time. Okay. And so I went and spent the day in our operations center where all the, if you press play to watch a movie or a series in your device, that's the center that plays that into your home.
Okay.
And so by doing these experiences within a matter of a couple of months, I felt like an insider to that organization and that industry. And I had appreciated what this business is all about and what is that value chain that I need to tap into through the people lens to start adding some more value to it.
That's important. I'm thinking back of when I got into IT sales, a decade or so ago, and I didn't have anything. It was a totally new thing. I went from nonprofit to for-profit sales into a sector that I didn't really know anything about. And I forget about it, but I spent a lot of time sitting with our technicians, a lot of time listening to their help desk phone calls, or just watching them, navigate around their computer like a wizard as they're remoting into somebody else's device, fixing things. I heard the good, I heard the bad, before I even ever went out and tried to assume that I knew what I was going to be talking about to a potential client. in this case. So I think that translates well across the board.
For sure.
Okay, so in the HR space, how do we make it to where people aren't scared to deal with their HR departments? Because you can see, when someone's getting a call from our HR department, they're not happy to take that call. Now, does that have a lot to do with maybe performance anxiety? They know they're not doing well in the job. They know this could be something bad, or they don't. They think everything's going just fine. Is HR something that companies can leverage in a more positive way rather than just being seen as the hiring and firing muscle of the company?
Sure. And I guess I have had both experiences to the extreme. So I won't mention the name of the company, but they were famous at the time for having corporate leaderships, and more than one in use. And so this is our group CHRO coming for a market visit, and I was lucky enough to be in the market when the gentleman came around, and he came with the corporate leadership and 2 bodyguards. And I'm thinking, holy moly. Why are you? Unless you're the president of the United States, why would anyone need
these guys in big suits with sunglasses and bulging wires coming out their ears?
Yeah, and I didn't dare to ask whether they were armed or not.
Right. Yeah.
But I assume even if they were not armed, they would easily kill if they had to. And so that's one version of how the most senior person in a large conglomerate corporate engage with the normal people on the ground. And the other one is the CHRO of another company, I won't mention the name, that used to take the tube to come to work, right? What's wrong with that, right? And so you see the two extremes, and you can then start to develop an appreciation for what will it feel like to be an employee of that organization. If that's the people, leaders, behavior, legacy, role modeling, what can I expect as a good citizen of this organization? So I would probably put in the caveat by saying that I have had the good fortune of working mostly for, forward-looking, modern, amazing companies that had an HR function that was considered to be modern and forward-looking and close to the employees, supporting them, creating value, rather than computer says, no, you can't give a raise to this person. You can't do that. Here's the disciplinary process. Let me walk you through the performance improvement plan.
Yes.
Sorry to say, but you have been categorized as a number 7 on a 9-box grid, and all those other things that we have, too often heard about. So I think there is this, full spectrum of what you can expect from HR. And, sometimes people are more selective into, and especially the younger generations, if you look at the Gen Zs and the millennials and all those segments of the workforce, they have very different expectations from their employer than I had.
Totally different.
Right? When I started, it was all about them asking me, why would we need to hire you? What is it that you bring to the table? Right. I mean, I stepped down from the corporate ladder less than 2 years ago. Those assessment centers that I ran for those young people, it was a complete reversal. It's like, why would I want to come and join you? And I'm thinking, holy moly, that used to be completely the other way around when I was in charge, right? And so that's how the shift and the different demands in generations will ultimately force, the people function to either play ball and go with that, or, start to risk losing some talent, or worse, not being able to attract the right talent into the organization, which I know and that is going to be very costly.
Okay, before we transition out of the HR stuff, I want to hit on this because this is a topic that I deal with almost every day what we're doing here is mostly B2C B2B type of work. And I'm talking with business owners and executives, and from larger businesses to smaller businesses. and people in between that are in those companies. And I can't tell you a day that the subject doesn't come up of, I can't find people who are willing to work. Now, in jest, we can joke about, in conversation, man, I remember when, if I went to an interview, it was, and I got the job and I didn't show up on time. If I didn't get, or even early and stay late and be willing to do additional and all these kind of things to show how invested I was. And so that's that work ethic that's instilled in a lot of people, maybe in their high 30s and up and stuff. And what I hear is that, man, I can't find any good people. And I'll post a position for, let's say, a sales role, and I'll bring people in and interview them. And it is so hard to find. I think it's probably always hard to find somebody with this mentality of what you talked about. Even if you tell them two things is all you need. You need to have the ability to always be trying to get better, right? And then what was the first one that you said?
Know your customer.
Know your customer, right? Be willing to ask questions and be genuinely interested, not surface level, but make a friend. That's what I always tell my folks. Make a friend, find a need, transfer a feeling. And you get to know people for real. And it's just so foreign. And so there's this huge disconnect where people are giving up on even trying because they'll sit down and interview, and that's what'll happen. I don't want to answer your questions about why I would be good working here or what I have to offer. You tell me why I'd want to work for you.
Yes.
What's caused that transition? Because ultimately we need people to work and be good at what they do and be driven, and they need jobs. People need jobs in order to survive and maintain. So how do we get past this problem? How do we?
Yes. I mean, again, that is the $1 million question, but I can speak to the practices that I have seen that are more helpful than others. So one of them was, and again, this was my fascination with why I joined Vodafone. I was actually looking for a role. And when I was headhunted and I spoke to the CHRO at the time, he was a very convincing guy, and he really, sold the organization to me in ways that I didn't even imagine would be possible. But one of the things that was the ultimate intrigue for me to come and join them was that for something like 10 years, they had global engagement scores across the board. And Vodafone at the time was active in 24 markets. Mm-hmm. That were higher than that of Google, Apple, or any other top performing organization. In the top quadrant, if you do the 2x2 matrix of high performing organizations, they were the top quadrant leader, and they had been there for 10 years. Now, that was oh my goodness, how is that even possible?
Right.
Like, just from an HR perspective, and I love numbers and I love analytics, how can you sustain that? I mean, you can make it lucky a year or two.
Right. Yep.
But how do you maintain that momentum? So again, what I saw, and that's what kept me going for 8 years in the same organization, was the reality matched that promise that I heard at the outset of joining. So when we talk about employer value proposition, a lot of HR people tend to get very technical and complicate things. I like to think of that as one of the key value propositions of an employer, which is, you will be joining an organization that is highly engaged. And we know that it can't be just pay, or can't be just the benefits, or can't be, you have to get a number of levers right in order to maintain and sustain those high levels of engagement. So that was one of the things that attracted me to come and join them. The second thing that I really liked about the company that spoke to me very specifically was the level of autonomy I had in that organization. So I only did 2 jobs in 8 years. So I wasn't like floating like I did previously in FMCG. Every 1.5, 2 years, I go into a new job, into a new country. But boy, in every one of those 2 positions I had, I felt like a mini CEO or a mini CHRO. I had limited budget and limited organizational resources to work with, but within those boundaries, I could do anything. And that meant that, when I was partnering with commercial leaders, that's what I did for 3 years. Then I was promoted to come to work at the head office level, working with our group CFO, who is today the group CEO. I had an incredible amount of autonomy. And that meant that I could decide what is the best for the finance function, which is the one I supported. 27,000 people, 24 markets, group CFO as my key business partner and her finance leadership team. I felt like a CHRO in my own right to be able to do what I felt was necessary and needed to support the finance organization. And of course, that earns you respect, that earns you credibility, and that earns you, true partnership. But these are just a few nuggets around how can any organization, you don't have to have the scale of a Vodafone with 100,000 people.
Right, that's what's going to get at. What about these
100 people,
one?
Size organization? If you think about what truly matters to your people to get their highest levels of engagement, then I promise you are on the right path.
How did you parlay the HR experience into some of the things you're doing now in executive coaching and leadership coaching and things like that?
Yes. So this is my origin story, right? Every coach has an origin story. And this is my fascination with the field of coaching. So it's probably the year 2006. And I am leading what is called a succession planning / talent management forum. So this is me as part of the executive committee as the HR guy with all the other functional leaders, the GM or the MD included, talking about those positions and who could be credible successors to those positions. And here's the sales director making a suggestion that immediately irritated the heck out of 60% of those leaders in the room.
Okay.
And so he mentioned, let's call him John Doe. He has dared to put John Doe into the succession list to his position as an immediate successor, a short-term ready successor. And hell broke out. And the GM was very courteous. He kind of, let everyone have a go. And then he had a go at John Doe, why he believed that he would be the absolute wrong person to be promoted anywhere above the level that he was at.
Okay.
Funnily enough, John Doe was the most successful sales leader we had in the company, right? Now, there was something about the leadership behaviors that was getting in the way of John Doe being considered for the top job at the country level. Now, I had been in many organizations before that, and I knew that whenever we talk about behavior change and behavior transformation, probably the best place to go to is a dedicated, specialized coach that works in this particular field. Okay. Now, I had never been coached before myself, so I didn't have that direct experience. I just knew that this is something that could work. Now, lo and behold, when I made that suggestion, everyone agreed, because don't forget, John Doe was the most successful salesperson in the operating company. So it wasn't like people wanted him out. No, but they just could not imagine for a second that he would be promoted to the C-suite. And so I, spoke to a few of my HR director colleagues. I spoke to the mothership in London, and they sent me 3 suggestions. I paired them up with John Doe, and John decided to go ahead with one of the 3 people. And they worked for a year. And here we go to the next round of succession planning. With 2 players, everyone was still the same. 2 players had changed.
Okay.
Marketing and the sales director and the GM were still the same individuals. And of course, the sales director has put the name of John Doe again as the immediate short-term ready now successor. And I was just waiting for the lightning to strike.
Yeah.
And suddenly the lightning strikes, but in ways that I could not even imagine, which is suddenly the discussion breaks out as to, is that role really going to be exciting enough for John Doe, or should we start to think about something that's bigger than the country role in sales? And
so there, the lightning struck, but it skipped a rung on the ladder.
Holy moly. That's the same dude who we had this conversation about a year ago. And at the time, everyone said, over my dead body.
Yeah.
And now people are fighting for his next level promotion and potentially doing something that's more than just this small country operation type sales role. And so that was my moment of intrigue where I started to think about what actually happens in the room. I mean, I saw John with his coach in the room probably about 10 times during that year-long engagement. They have probably had another 10 sessions without me noticing. But what happened in those 20-hour-long sessions between the coach and John Doe that led to his improvement in ways that were not just noticed, but recognized and appreciated? And so that was kind of my origin story as to what led me to, when I felt ready for it, to go and embark and train and educate myself to become a professional coach.
Okay. So coaching is interesting the way I look at it. Like, I've been a couple times over the years in my professional life, been connected to people who have kind of been brought in to help coach me to certain things, but it's always been relatively disconnected in a way that I struggled with knowing that the person coaching me had, again, I'll say it again, fruit on the tree. I didn't know that term at the time, but we all kind of understand, even subconsciously, when we're dealing with somebody that they may have the credentials that say something, but not necessarily the production or the results to back it up, in their own experience. And sometimes a coach can be like coaching you to do things that are not necessarily the hard things that you should be doing, but are counterproductive, like that to success, right? I remember I had a coach once and said, "Why are you trying to learn so much? Why do you read so much? Why are you need to focus on this? Why are you trying to," and I immediately, like, my receptors for accepting coaching completely turned off, and they never turned back on. But if I was to back up even farther, all my coaching experience was from my youth and being involved in sports. And every coach that I'd ever had experience doing the things that they were showing me how to do. Maybe not world-class championship level, but had the principal foundational experience and understanding to support the methods they were using to coach me, right? And coaching wasn't just, "Okay, Brian, come to practice once a week. We'll get together for an hour or so. We'll talk about what you've been working on the week before, and we'll see if you've gotten any better." No, like in sports and athletics, it's constant training, and that coach being there as you're doing it, looking at the fundamental things that you may or may not be doing wrong. Are you taking shortcuts in the way you're weightlifting? Are you taking shortcuts in the way you're running? Is your form bad? Catching, throwing, you name the sport, but there's this constant watching the deviations to the line that you're supposed to be carrying in order to improve. Are you pushing yourself, or are you just dogging it? When at a track practice, go run a mile, we can all just go jog a mile and having not gotten any better at the end of that mile. But what are you doing in that mile to try to improve something that's going to make you perform better in a competition, right? So in your experience with coaching, how do you, because you can't be that person necessarily for everybody at all times and carry a load of people that you're working with. How do you solve that problem? Or do you see that problem crop up?
So allow me to go back to how I found the coach for John Doe.
Okay.
And, it sort of ashames me today by saying that all that I applied in terms of criteria to get to that selection is just referrals, right? I rang up a few HRDs and the mothership and said, "I have this particular challenge with this one gentleman. And do you know of any coaches that work in that area?" And I got a few names. I vetted a few of those, and 3 of them I paired up to have a chemistry conversation with John, and he decided to go ahead with one of those. Now, I wrote the guide to select the coach that's right for you about 5 years ago, because every single HR person that I spoke with had the exact same challenge, which is, I'm not even sure what to look for when I
Yeah.
am bringing in a coach, either for myself or for someone in the organization, to make sure that they are the right fit. And so, without getting into the full detail of the 10 criteria, I call them the golden criteria because everything is golden in my world. The golden criteria in selecting the right coach. Some of those golden criteria are things like credentials, right?
Hmm.
Now, there are, just in the German speaking area, this is Germany, Austria, Switzerland,
Okay.
7 different coaching associations that certify and accredit coaches. Now, I can tell you, of someone who spent most of his life in Germany, I wouldn't know the difference between association number 3 and 5, right? But I know one thing, which is there is one body of work. This is the International Coaching Federation. That is the only international credible association body for coaching. So that means that when I am looking for a credential, I will go with the gold standard in coaching, which is the ICF. And by doing that, I will make sure that whoever I'm pre-selecting is at least legit and genuine and has gone through a rigorous or, solid training as a coach. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and I find that interesting because, 50% of my coaching clients in 23 and 22 have been CEOs. And again, I never started out to become the CEO coach.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, most of my clients that started to come to me initially were HRDs and CHROs because they just saw the HR experience that I had and they felt intrigued by that. They felt that it will be right to work with someone who understands the world and knows a thing or two about them.
Yep.
And so when I then have someone who speaks to me and wants to do some joint work or wants to join me for some pitches to corporates and so on, and they call themselves CEO coach, and then I ask them, how many CEOs have you coached and what kind of organization size and level were they at? There's very little to evidence against, right? So again, it's things like this that ultimately will make sure that whoever is selected or pre-selected as a coach is really having the maximum impact possible if the client has the chemistry and would like to proceed with them. And of course there's a whole host of different other things we could do, but I just gave away 2 or 3 of the selection criteria to make sure that whoever is in this position, and allow me by saying that whoever wants to get their hand on this guide, just send me a LinkedIn invite or a message. I will send that guide for free. It's not something I'm selling, to just help them to get a little closer to the coach that would serve them in the most effective way.
So what type of coach do you think generally, as you've experienced working with CEOs, what type of personality or mindset jives well with your classic kind of high level CEO type person?
Yeah, I mean, some of those criteria are sometimes the CEO has a particular industry challenge. And so they are new to an industry and they seem to be struggling to really be effective in that industry. I think it's legitimate in that case to look for a coach that's been working with CEOs in that particular sector. Right?
Okay.
Because there's cross-industry learnings and best practice that may be applicable to them as well. Now, coaching is not mentoring. It's not like every single session I'm offering some advice to my client.
Yeah.
That being said, if I'm aware of certain practices, if I have seen things working at the highest level, and the client is open to receive that, here and there, it would be foolish not to offer it up to them and ask for the permission to offer it up to them. So that's one of the things. The other thing I would say is I know incredible coaches who did the study 30 years back and all they have done is coaching. Now, they are very experienced as coaches, but they have 0 embodied experience of what it's like to work in a corporation, to be exposed to commercial pressures, to have ever interacted with the board of directors or the chairman or the chairwoman, to really have a deep appreciation for how difficult it could be. I had 3 line managers when I joined this fast-moving consumer goods company in Germany. I was a European head of HR. I had a local HRD that was in charge of Germany technically. Then I had my regional HR person, and then I had the global HR person. So I had 3 bosses to report to, right? And so if you have never been exposed to that matrix type organization setup, well, if that is the challenge that your client is struggling with, all you can add value in your coaching is from hearsay at most.
Yep.
And so again, there are always things that the client can be looking for by making sure that they apply the top 10 golden criteria in a way that makes sense for them. And by the way, what may make sense for Brian as the CEO of this tech consulting business may be fundamentally different than for Navid, who is a solopreneur and is running a coaching practice. And so that's the other angle to that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. I've found in my past the people that end up being the best impact on me are the people that are willing to say the tough things and point out things that might be ego damaging to me if I'm not willing to get beyond that in order to, like you coached before, be willing to get better. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And allow me by adding one more angle to this, which is when we train to become coaches and we do it the proper way, it's a bit like becoming a GP. You're a general practitioner. A broken finger, a bruised skin, or a flu, you can treat all of them with a reasonable likelihood of success, right? But God forbid, Brian, if I had a serious heart condition, the last person I would want to talk to is my GP, although I love him, right? Because I would want to go to speak to the deep cardiac expert that has 20 plus years of deep experience in this particular challenge that I'm faced with as a patient. And so the same analogy applies to coaching, right? The reason I became who I am today is because I specialize early in my coaching practice. I don't coach anyone and everyone on anything and everything. I only coach C-level clients when they are going through a career transition. That's all I do.
Of which you've had a lot of experience, right?
Exactly. And if I could write that book just based on my own experience, which is not what I did, but if I wanted to write a book about it, it would probably be worth a book.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the angle. You do have the fruit on the tree. You've specialized in that C-suite and up in career transition, which we just spent, almost an hour talking about. That's awesome. Okay, so when you're not working, when you're not coaching, what are you doing to enjoy life?
Yes. So this is really important, Brian. And I think that's, part of the reason I really struggled to write this book, right? It took me 7 years from start to finish. And I just, love fellow authors who had the luxury of taking a year out, go on a lonely island, meditate every morning and be in the Zen mode and drink the matcha latte. Yeah. And, after 6 or 12 months, produce this wonderful manuscript that becomes a best-selling book. Right? The way I did it was I had an executive HR role that was full on. I was in a global role for a global organization, and I really was stretched to the core. On top of that, I was coaching on the side, 2 to 3 clients at any point in time, but still, that kind of is an additional thing that keeps you busy. And of course, I was trying to be a good husband, a good father, and write my book at the same time. And I think it really doesn't take a PhD to think that is probably a little too much to be wanting to do at the same time. And so that's why I, try to minimize the impact to my family as a matter of fact. So one of the things I did that really worked to help with my productivity was, I'm an early bird anyway. And so on Saturdays and Sundays, I put the alarm clock 2 hours before I would normally wake up, which is usually anyway earlier than anyone else in the family would wake up. And by doing that, I made sure that I have me time and time to reflect and time to think. And this is important about writing a book, You have to be in the creative writing process and mindset, and you cannot force that on yourself. There is no button I can push to start become the author and the writer and the juices just flow.
Right.
I get into this. No, I have to create space for it, and eventually it will flow.
Yeah.
And so by doing that, what I try to do is to disrupt the time that I take away from my time with the family. And there are many more practices that people can do, but this is just one example. So family time is for me very important. I mean, our call finishes at 7 p.m. my time here in Dubai. That is the time that I will go and play with our son. That is special time with daddy. I did that even as a busy exec, 30 minutes during the week. And of course, it's a much longer time that we spend during weekends, so that we get a bond and a connection and something that is more than just seeing my son over the weekend kind of thing, as many busy execs do. And sometimes one day of a weekend is gone as well, because you need to fly to Shanghai to be there early in the morning on Monday. And so you kind of start to cut down on your spare time and free time. The other thing that I do is I like to be active, right? I mean, if there's one thing we all learned very well during the pandemic and on the back end of it, is that you can't be just stuck on a chair for 12 hours every day and just go from call to call to call to call. So I try to mix and match my activities by having some face-to-face interaction, having some virtual calls, and generally speaking, trying to limit the coaching that I do to no more than 3 clients a day. And by doing that, what I do is I keep myself fresh and I keep myself sharp and focused on the matter. And so, of course, I could do like a coaching factory type thing where I would coach 8 to 12 leaders any given day. I'm just not too sure if on the 10th call of that day, I would be equally creative, resourced, and ready to serve as I am right now, and with the limitation that I have. And then the other thing that is a big passion of mine is traveling. I've been a bit of a Marco Polo all my life. I have really kept doing that. And our son, thank goodness, is also a very keen traveler. And so he loves, even if it's a staycation, to just get out and about and explore the world. And I think the world is an incredible place, a place that I take a lot of imagination for the work I do as an author, for the work I do as a coach, and just generally speaking, to become a better global citizen.
What's your favorite place to visit?
I don't have a single place to visit, and this is why we rarely go back to the same place twice.
Okay.
So, I think I'm 51 now, and I have probably traveled to 80 countries.
Wow.
And so there is at least another 120 left. And I probably have got another 30 or 40 years to give. So
that's right.
That's kind of my way of looking at the world.
Okay. So let me rephrase that. Of the places you've been so far, and it's probably hard to just recall, what are some of the most interesting, the most impactful, maybe the places that you've had some experience you've really enjoyed?
Yes.
What do you got there?
So let me pick out 2 extremes.
Okay.
So one of the joys of being in a global HRD role was when I was working for a pharmaceutical company called Roche. They are a top 10 pharmaceutical company, and they had at the time the largest operating company in San Francisco in California.
Okay.
So that was, 16,000 people, and it was a sizable part of the business, globally speaking. So I got the luxury of traveling to San Francisco for a full week every quarter. And I just loved that optimism, that startup mentality, that tech-heavy kind of, concentration of tech businesses in one place.
But what time frame was it? Were you traveling to San Francisco?
In the year 2012 to 2014.
Okay. So, all right. Yep. Kind of exciting.
It was
transitioning out of some economic issues. And it was
days. I mean, everyone was expanding, whether it was Facebook, whether it was PayPal, whether it was eBay, whether, Apple, you name them, they were all kind of growing and adding and eating. And so that was super exciting, because I felt like, these are unique moments in your life. And I've been very lucky indeed. I've been involved in, things like when the Berlin Wall came down, right? I was there. When the currency got changed from Deutschmark to Euro. I mean, these are things that most people don't experience in their lives, right? And that's why I said at the outset of the call, I am that lucky guy, right? I look at myself and I just look in the mirror and say to myself, you are a lucky kid. And you are, you should be incredibly grateful for it. And I am.
Yeah. So you're 51. I'm 44 now. So you're 7 years older than me. So when the Berlin Wall came down, that was that 89, 90-ish, that kind of time frame. I remember I was young, so I was about 9, 10 years old.
Yes.
So we talked about it in school, and it was a big deal because, your Cold War and all those kind of things in East Germany, West Germany. What was it like living there? Because you would have been knocking on the door of 18, 19, 20 years old. So you experienced a lot of Germany, when it was divided. What was that energy like when it came down?
Yeah. So first off, I had an incredible teacher at the time at school, and we actually had that as a subject. Like, we were like, dreaming about when, if ever, would this be the case that the wall kind of, is removed. And she said, look, she was like 60 at the time. She was a very wise woman. She said, look, I have been born in this country. I have studied history, and I know a thing or two about politics. If you ask me to put down any money on the fact that this wall comes down during my lifetime, you better don't bet on it. And of course, 2 years later, the wall
came down.
And so again, it was unimaginable. And of course, it still happened. And many other things that I deemed unimaginable have happened since then. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say, I wanted to come back to these amazing places and take another extreme, which is nothing like San Francisco. This was in Kenya. So we took the bold decision in the middle of the pandemic where there was a lot of limitation around travel and being vaccinated and which country you can travel to, what's the quarantine, and all these various very confusing regulations that were put in place, different regulations for different countries and so on. We just thought that we had been, locked down for too long. And I did a bit of research and I found that we could travel to Kenya and we picked a very remote location in the middle of the forest. And that was like a luxury holiday type thing where you wake up and there is like giraffes, coming down to your head and saying good morning to you. So we took the risk and the plunge and went as a family. And that was the most incredible thing. I mean, I think our son was 4 or 5 at the time. It was just an out-of-the-world experience. It was a resort with 30 staff. They had all been manned down in the resort because they couldn't travel out of that place. We came, and there was the 3 of us, and we had 30 people looking after us for a week. At the 3-member family, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have to tell you that, if my son didn't believe that we are some sort of a royal family, then I don't know what else would be like to be in that sort of a space and serene environment. It was just beautiful. It's such a lovely country, incredible people, such levels of hospitality. I really have to shout it out here and say, anyone that hasn't been to Kenya, please go. It will be well worth the investment.
Wow, that's fantastic. Any kind of hobbies or anything that besides, traveling, the family, do you follow any sports or anything like that?
Nothing too serious. I have a passion for the companies that I have worked for so far. So, when it comes to sports, any football team that is wearing the 3 stripes is one that I support, but there are far too many of those around. So I don't have a unique, identifiable team to connect with. I'm also, thinking of myself as being multi-versatile. So I have tried football, as in what would we call football back in Europe, soccer, as you would call it. I have done taekwondo, so I've tried martial arts. Tried running for a couple of years. I was very good at table tennis or ping pong. And, I have gotten into the habit of meditating for about 10 years now. So there is not a single sport that I have been passionate about since my childhood, and I have identified my favorite team, and I've kind of kept loyal to that team and its mission. But I like to, challenge myself every couple of years to try out something completely differently and see, where it takes me. And so that's kind of my attitude towards sports. The only hobby that I have that I am allowed to say that it actually is a hobby next to my family is writing. So you will see that on LinkedIn, I have a very large and loyal following, and I have been very regularly writing. This is now 3-4 years, at least one article a week, and sometimes two. So next to writing my actual book, I am very much interested in thought leadership.
Okay.
And that is something that I feel deeply passionate about, and always find time either on a plane or on a train to read, digest, reflect, and share back with my followers what I, took away from that, 60-page white paper or so.
Yeah. How have you gotten good at doing that digesting, the reflecting, and then, producing some content that's communicated in a way that people really take a liking to? Because I've always thought I read a lot, I experience a lot. I'd love to be able to share that in a way that could be beneficial to people, right, and edifying to people. But when I sit down to do it, I'm always like, I don't even know where to start.
Yes.
So what advice do you have for folks on that?
For sure. So first off, the big mistake I made right at the outset, this is about 3.5 years ago, I really took it on myself to produce thought leadership. And of course, I was, still writing the book, about finishing the book and so on. I just felt that I needed to produce something that is unique and, new to the world, and an angle that nobody else has been thinking about. And so I really made it extra hard for myself to create anything. I eventually did that. So I launched 8 articles, and I created like a mini article series about leadership transitions and the biggest mistakes that happen and how to overcome those challenges. That in a way was in line with what I ultimately produced as a book. But boy, I took too much time, and it just was too much of a way to carry on doing. And what I then realized is that although these articles were beautifully crafted and very long in and detailed, it really didn't speak to the audience that I wanted to attract and speak to, which is, you get about 3 or 5 minutes to go through your feed. The last thing you want to do is to spend 35 minutes reading this wonderful article about this one challenge of an executive transition. And so I then changed gears, becoming the best at getting better. I changed gears and started to create short posts. LinkedIn allows you 2,200 characters only. That's about a 1 page max.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I saw that the traction on those short, sharp articles was much better. And so I've experimented with video. A lot of people say these days that video is king. I can't really claim that for myself. I've tried video. I didn't quite get the traction that I get with my short post. So that would be my single advice to anyone that's looking to get started. Don't make it too hard. Experiment, learn fast, and if things work out, improve. If they don't, leave it, start something else, and eventually you will find the sweet spot.
Yeah. And I also hear again what we opened with today, those 2 things that you were coached on. You fell back on it, and you even mentioned it again today. Know your audience, be the best at getting better. So if there's anything I'm going to take away from that conversation, is this conversation today, is don't forget about that, because those are 2 principles that can be applied in so many different places in our lives.
Yes. And again, just to make the point, when I started out 12 years ago to coach, I had no idea, not even the slightest imagination of where the journey would take me, right? And it was in 22 that CEO Today, the magazine, named me the #1 coach in the world, to my surprise, and I think to everyone else's surprise. And they did the same thing last year again. And so again, if I had thought of myself to be the HR coach or the whatever coach, it may or may not have worked out, but what I did was what I can do best, which is, supporting executives through their very, risky and table stakes type career transitions. And by doing that several hundred times over, I just became better and better and better so that I could, produce this wonderful book and be acknowledged and recognized by some of the authorities in this field. And so that's, again, just to make the point that I wish, Brian, I was that strategic 10 years ago and had this strategic vision and mindset, and I would exactly plan it out that I'm jumping the corporate ship when I get 50. Yeah. I'm going to produce a best-selling book. Then I'm going to go to Dubai and set up my coaching practice. I had no clue whatsoever what I was up to. All I knew was I need to get to be the best at getting better in whatever I do. And I need to know my customer. And those two, truths, let's call them, by my very early mentor have been kind of, guiding principles for me all these years throughout.
Excellent. What was the name of the book again? Remind me.
Mastering Executive Transitions is the title of my book.
All right. I'm getting that book and I'll let you know when I'm done reading it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, everybody else get that book too.
Yeah, let's do something exciting for the audience, Brian.
Okay.
I leave it to you and the team to decide who should benefit from this.
All right.
Let's just pick 10 people and you get to choose what's the selection criteria that will be gifted either the audiobook or the ebook version of my best-selling book.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll make it happen. Well, Navid, this has been fantastic. I do a little bit of prep when it comes to trying to get to know folks before I come into a show. But my favorite part of the show is learning more about what I didn't know, because I don't know what I don't know. And that's why I try to ask a lot of questions and learn a lot. Hopefully everybody who watches learned a lot too. Thank you so much for your time today. And I can't wait to see you and hear about all the great things you do in the future. We'll have you on again sometime.
My pleasure. And thank you, Brian, and your partner for what you guys do. I mean, having a podcast is a very labor-intensive exercise and activity. And I've just listened to a handful of the episodes so far. And what I can say is it really is valuable if you are in this space, if you're interested to learn about leadership, business, or anything that's related to the workplace, then this is probably one of the best places to go to. And I will certainly become a regular from now on, now that I've had the pleasure of getting to know you and the product as a customer.
Thank you, Navid. We appreciate that. Thank you so much.